What is up, everyone? For all the tech nerds and tech enthusiasts like myself who love to learn about machine learning, AI, and big data, and data in general, and how these technologies can be used by companies and even countries to leapfrog the competition and stay ahead of the game, this episode is 100% for you. I was fortunate enough to have Robert Sibo, who's an expert on the topic, to come to the show and share his insights and experiences. So let me just give you a bit of a background about Rob. So Rob is an analytics and machine learning professional with 20 plus years of experience consulting and building solutions for top companies in Asia, Europe, North America, including 6 years in Australia. Robert graduated from Carnegie Mellon University, one of the top universities globally for artificial intelligence and robotics, with a degree in decision systems and artificial intelligence. Rob has spent the last 4 years working in Silicon Valley, United States, the heart of innovation and artificial intelligence, working with companies like Facebook and Apple, as well as others, building advanced digital businesses, modern data architectures, and machine learning solutions. For the past 10 plus years, Rob has been active publishing point of views, presenting at conferences, and building a machine learning consulting practice to service the disruptive companies in Silicon Valley. He's now building up a practice for Slalom based out of Sydney. Before we get started, please consider subscribing. It will ensure you stay up to date with all the content and all the amazing episodes that are about to be released in the next couple of weeks. In fact, it is the only way you can be notified and find out about all the things that are coming up. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. Yeah, it's looking perfect. We're good. All right. I'm here with Rob. Rob, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me come in. This is
I
awesome.
I don't want to act like a fan, but having a look at your background and experience and what you've been doing, I wasn't too sure if you were going to make the time. I felt like that was a bit of a step up for me. So thank you so much. And I think that we have a ton of things that we're gonna talk about in the world of strategy, data, AI, machine learning, Australia,
A little bit of everything.
a
Yeah.
little bit of everything. Um, I guess we can start with perhaps your journey over the last 5 years, maybe 4 or 5 years, and what you've been up to.
Yeah. So, I guess I'm blessed as a recent re-enter to Australia. I'm blessed to be able to come back here, actually. I spent about 7 years with Australia, in the past. Did the classic thing, married, moved to the UK, spent my time up there, and this is where I started getting plugged back into some of these, leading companies and
Yeah.
trends that were forming around the AI, ML, and data and analytics. After about 3 years there, I moved to Silicon Valley with a consulting company that I'm part of now, Slalom, and led the data and analytics out of Silicon Valley, and spent the last 4 odd years there. And I think it was just such a privilege to be able to kind of be exposed to this. And I'm not saying it from a, being part of like, making $1 billion and going IPO, more of seeing how the culture and innovation and all this stuff works together and how they've cracked the nut and made that possible within their companies.
Yep.
And, just coming back to Australia, and we just moved here, my wife and my child.
Nice.
We moved back in February. We finally got a visa that we were working on for better part of 3 years.
Right.
And maybe I can get back into that later because I'm becoming a poster boy for this immigration, as you probably can gather.
Yeah.
I want to make sure we get more people with this experience coming back to
Sure.
Australia. So, I got this thing approved, and my wife and I are like, let's go. And I'm like, well, why don't we wait till May, wait till the school year to finish for our daughter? She's like, no, let's just get going. Like, we need to go. And I was like, all right, fine, let's do that. So we
The
left
gut
in
feeling
February.
was telling her something was about to go down, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
and she'll say that she's Turkish, so she'll
Yeah, okay.
say that her mother was telling her this. And she said, let's just get going. And
Yeah.
so we moved out here. We got here on like the 3rd of March. And if you
Right.
remember, the 15th of March is when COVID hit.
Right.
And I could not have been happier. I mean, even in lockdown, this is the place to be for lockdown.
Yeah.
California, the US was just such a mess, as we've seen.
I think we had it so much better than a lot of other people. And this is where, gratitude, and I don't want to go on a spiritual journey with this podcast, but I think This is where gratitude comes in. Like at some point, when we had the very strict lockdown in Sydney, which didn't go for too long. It was like about maybe 2 3 weeks. That these were the toughest weeks, and at some point you're like, what is this about? Like, what is going on? But then when you come out of it and you look at everywhere else, and you look at the entire picture, you're like, wow, no, it's great to be in Australia,
Hmm.
um, inside or outside of COVID, I think.
Yeah.
So, so you guys moved back, um, just before COVID, so March time, and so now you're set to continue your journey and your career, with slalom in Australia.
Yeah. And what we're trying to do, and the company is, it's a U.S. based company,
Right.
and we just opened up our offices here back in January.
Yeah.
And what I would say is that while we provide a lot of services, what I'm really more interested in is the data and analytics,
Yeah.
and I see this as a perfect marriage of the opportunity that we're seeing in Australia. I was looking at a report yesterday. In 2019, Australia actually was number 8 in the list of countries for ML AI type papers. Yes, we're not up there with the US and we're not up
Mm,
there with China, but number 8 is quite formidable. I
yep.
think there's this untapped opportunity here.
Yep.
And I think part of what's holding it back is just the infrastructure, the
Mm,
ability to work with a consulting partner, an IT partner, whatever, capital partners to some degree, and to try to lift these things up. And I'm seeing at Woolies and I'm seeing at other clients here, they're just busting to try to take some of these use cases and learn from what's been
yep.
going on elsewhere. And that's always been a thing with Australia. We've always
Mm,
been looking at what's happening up in Asia, what's happening in the UK. But now's the time to leapfrog a lot of this stuff. And I see Australia, I'm really pleased to see it coming back here. Everyone's really interested. And we're looking to try to help facilitate that evolution
mm.
of a lot of these companies.
It's interesting because in business, if you are always trying to, and it's fair to compare nations to businesses sometimes, right? And if you look at businesses that are trying to always keep up with whoever who's at the top is doing,
Mm,
you're never at the top. You're at second,
yeah.
place, best case scenario. So, what do you think Australia can do, and Australian businesses or even the government, can start to do to really leapfrog, like you said, and leverage technologies that are emerging and out there, to really get ahead?
Yeah, and it's almost too easy to just play second,
Mm,
kind of fiddle. And there, to be honest, there is a business model around that. I mean, especially with innovation, sometimes the leaders are the ones who lose out on it,
yeah,
and it's really the people who can productionalize and scale
yeah,
the innovation. But that aside, like, let's just pick on our retail banks. If they wanted to try to leapfrog some of the stuff they're seeing up in Asia,
yeah.
you can buy the tools, you can buy the software. I
Mm,
mean, this is a good thing and a bad thing. It gives you that false sense of
yeah,
competition that you're up there at the top. But really, what you need to do is think, what is it we're going to do here with the Australian market or with the Asian market, if you're going to think
mm,
broader, that could be unique? And how do I
yeah,
use these tools to help me out? If you
yeah,
try to bring in some of the technology from the US or the UK, you're just going to replicate their success, hopefully.
yeah,
But as you know, the market's different here. The needs for the people are different. The cultural norms are a bit different.
yeah.
So some of the technology I see with Bank of America may not be relevant for, say, CBA or
Mm,
NAB. So we need to think, what do we want to do that's unique here? What does the people want?
mm.
And then try to find the technology to fulfill that.
Amazing. And I think we'll come back to that, in a little bit, but I just want to get a bit more perspective, on what you and Slalom do, with businesses and companies that you work with. Are you focused on specific sectors? Are you focused on, I guess, maybe geographically just Australia or maybe APAC? And what kind of industries that you see potential in and are focusing on?
Yeah. I think the elevator pitch for us is, we are the full service consulting company, but what we're trying to do that's different is break away from the big four and get back into that personal touch.
Mm,
So we generally do not want our consultants to travel, for example. So there
right.
is a geographic kind of focus. While we have an office in Sydney, we have an office in Melbourne, we have an office in Tokyo.
Yep.
Soon we're going to start expanding. We don't want the traveling. We want that personal touch because we feel like the special sauce is when you have that personal touch, you work with the clients to understand their true needs,
Mm,
their true drivers, their customers, or their
yep.
citizens. that is not something that you get from spending 8 weeks with a PowerPoint heavy consulting project and you come out with 4 chevrons and say, here's our value drivers. Now come up with some AI use cases.
Right.
What comes from that is understanding how their business works through some simple projects. Maybe you start saying, oh, your issue is supply chain. You have no idea. And COVID highlighted this. You have no idea where your data, is to try to map out across the supply chain. Now, let me help you with this.
Yeah.
And you can start to really be prescriptive with some of the treatments. But what I'm really excited about, though, is, go back to your question, my area, we have Salesforce, we have change management and strategy. My area is really about data and analytics. So how do I pull all this information together, turn it into insights, both descriptive, but also getting in predictive? How do I start to automate some of the decisions? How do I augment humans in the decision? Machine learning, cloud, and all that is becoming massive kind of terms for us. So here in Australia, a lot of the conversations I've had over the last 6 months is, I want to do ML. Am I ready? No, sorry, you don't have your data right.
Yep.
You don't have the business engaged yet. You don't have all this stuff in place. So let's understand what the infrastructure, I'm using that in general terms, the infrastructure is to be able to jump onto those use cases. And then we can start getting into those use cases.
Yep.
So you're not quite ready to leapfrog, but we can help you get there. And this is what we want to bring. Yeah, close the gap.
A bit.
Yeah. And certainly it does help having the, international kind of experience where you can bring stories of what others have done. And I have a favorite story, and we'll just jam on this one. But I talk about one of the major kind of Bunnings competitors in the U.S. We did a piece of work with them where it was like, let's use computer vision to try to identify fraud. There was a leakage problem. They were like, we're losing a lot of stuff. Can I see what the employees are stealing? And we tried out computer vision, which isn't the best way because it's limited by the cameras. Yeah. But we identified that the number one thing that employees were stealing were bags of Funyuns. Funyuns are like Frito-Lay chips or whatever.
Yeah.
And, and there's a lot of other stuff that was leakage, and there's a lot of customers that just kind of push the trolley right out the door. But, it's funny what you find when you actually start looking at some of these things. Now, they had the data already. They were able to track SKUs. They can go down to the objects, and they can start to explore the ML use cases. But that's because we spent 6 years with them leading up to that, getting them up onto the cloud, getting a lot of their stuff digitized, cleaning up the data, getting the business to finally start thinking about cool questions. And the cool question was around, leakage in the stores. That was a question that the business would never have asked 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 6 years ago. So the journey is as much getting the business up to the point where they can start asking cool questions as it is getting the technology ready for them.
I was just going to say, to me, I think most of the times when people are not able to leverage data and for the most part technology to solve problems is not really understanding or having cool questions, like you said. What is it that we're actually trying to solve? What are the problems that are worth solving? Sometimes there are problems that are not worth solving at all. You gotta come up with a list of all the things that you think are important, and I'm not sure in the world of strategy what the terms are, but in my head, you've got to come up with all the things that you assume, and you have some assumptions on that these are the things that if we solve will have the highest return. And then look at the expected impact, and then say, okay, well, these are the top 5 or 6 things that I should focus on, because obviously we can't solve every single thing at a time. So it all starts with asking the right questions.
Yeah. And a lot of times it helps when, you start with a bold vision. The CEO says, well, in the world of COVID, the CEO might say, I need to digitize my whole distribution network. I need to be able to get from order to person's inbox or, mailbox in one day. I want to compete with Amazon. Or it could be, I want better customer stickiness. I need to be, 50 to 80% of the customer wallet, as far as X service. So you start with a bold vision. That helps you prioritize all those things. But then exactly like you said, you start with your matrix. You say, here's all the use cases. What's the cost? What's the potential benefit? What's the upside? But that bold vision is really going to help you out. It galvanizes your team to try to solve a problem. Otherwise, it's hard to say where your money's going. Is it going in the right spot or not? You just got a lot of busy wheels going to solve problems. And we see that a lot. So a lot of the work we might start off with is, strategy with a lowercase s.
Yeah.
And you sort of go in there and you sort of say, okay, well, what are we trying to solve? What are we trying to fix? And yes, okay, what data do you have? Okay, all right. I bet if we did this with machine learning, or we did this with some Tableau dashboards, you could start nudging the behavior of your customers or of your employees in the right direction. But that all starts with sort of, what are we trying to fix or chase after?
And when you use data and you look at data, are there specific parts of the business? So you mentioned supply chain, manufacturing. There's also the front end piece. So your sales and marketing, your consumers. Do you guys focus on specific areas of the business where you think data can help solve and improve the most, or is it all over the board?
Yeah, it unfortunately, with the way that corporations, and the larger you get, the worse it is. Unfortunately, the way corporations are structured, there's so much independence in each of those different areas. HR has their own IT budget, sales has their own IT budget, and they all chase after analytics projects in isolation. Whereas, yes, the recommendation, if you were at the CEO, would be, let's prioritize. Again, what are you trying to focus? Are you focusing on employee satisfaction because that drives better customer satisfaction? Or are you trying to cut cost or whatever? Let's assume they do that, and that's not a safe assumption. But yeah, when you come into working with the lines of business, what I'm seeing more and more now is IT needs to be an enabler, not the driver. And I know that sounds obvious, but there's quite a few large companies where the CIO and CTO runs the shop, and they shut down budgets, they close down opportunities. And what we're finding is that you're getting shadow IT, but you're also getting shadow analytic functions. So I actually love working with some of those shadow analytic functions. So HR, seriously underfunded, but so much opportunity. So people analytics, everything from lifetime value of an employee to propensity to leave to how do I help nudge them to become better employees and grow up the value chain towards management. Like, there's so much great stuff to do in HR. You can work with them directly, the business basically, and help enable them with analytics. You start seeing some real business changes. I find, sadly, you work with the IT group, and sometimes it gets dragged out and it gets lost. So definitely working within lines of business for analytics is where you want to start, and enable them with the tools to change things.
How about in marketing?
Sales and marketing, still, it's a fairly mature area. They've been using analytics for a long time. They've been looking at attribution analysis across channels. They've been looking at SKU rationalization. Like, there's just so much great stuff that happens in sales and marketing, but they're still trying to evolve that. So that's an exciting area to be part of. There's a lot of competition. You got everything from the traditional agencies to the IT consulting companies to the strategy groups. Their issue is, I have a lot of great ideas. I have a lot of people who want to help me out, but still, can I plot a direct line to get somewhere? And they also have a lot of money, right? The government, not the government, but the CEO, the executives have always just blindly invested in them. So I'm finding a lot of conversations about ROI. Can you justify all this spend? A lot of interesting conversations around COVID, around, should I keep spending money on outreach through digital because that seems to be the best way to reach people, or should we keep sending out the field teams to go do in-person meetings, whether it's doctors or retail stores? And there's a lot of question now around, where do I spend my money? And that was always a question, but now it's becoming even more prevalent because of COVID, I think. But yeah, so sales and marketing, great area, a lot of fun. HR, a lot of fun.
It's funny they say sales and marketing tend to get bigger budgets by nature, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think, because like, sales and marketing is about convincing people. So they convince the company, and not to say that it's not important, it's 100% important to understand your consumer, your customers, collect as much data as you can, ethically, but at the end of the day, your whole function is about understanding your customers and how do you sell and promote your products better. And so I think this is critical to use analytics and data for. But I just wonder if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy as well, where they always get an edge because of,
Well, and you're totally right. They're also better at marketing, so they'll market the heck out of themselves, and they'll get the funding for it. It also has this. It's very quantifiable. even if it's funny numbers, you can quantify how many people clicked on an email. You
Yeah.
can quantify how many people, looked at the ad.
Or spent the time on the site or
Yeah. So there's a lot of numbers, and people like
Mm,
numbers, and numbers give you a false sense of making a good
mm,
decision. And marketing and sales is great for that because there's a lot of numbers that you can
yeah.
play with. But there's still so much more we can do with that. And you still see all these startups popping up with, better ways of managing customer data, building out the
Mm,
CDP, building out the better cookie management,
yeah.
building out the privacy of the data and stuff. There's all that stuff coming together. So the MarTech and I guess the MarTech landscape is still
Mm,
massive and it's quickly growing. I don't think that's going to change. I think it's
yeah.
just going to keep going.
Going back to Australia, do you see opportunities? I know we talked about opportunities for Australian businesses um, to leverage data and technology to improve and leapfrog. But do you also see opportunities with Australian startups that are solely focused on how to leverage data and become the provider of the technology? Because I know most of it comes from, if we're going the other side of the world, it's,
Mm.
Silicon Valley and, in America, and maybe over here, it's probably China is one of
Yeah.
the leaders. But do you see an opportunity for Australian startups to go into that space as well?
Yeah, I definitely think there is. I look at what, New South Wales has this innovation hub concept, and we have
Yeah.
spots throughout New South Wales. There's also some in Adelaide and
Mm,
Canberra and down in Melbourne. Like the government is trying to help inject the capital, real estate, and mentorship
mm,
infrastructure needed to kind of incubate startups. I don't, what I haven't, which I still think needs to be worked on is I don't know if the customers, the clients are willing to take a bet on local fintech, local
right.
startups yet, because you have such a great portfolio coming from Silicon Valley or down from
Yep.
China. You have VCs pushing hard with massive marketing budgets to say you need to use this tool for this kind of
Mm,
martech analytics or this whatever hyperparameter optimization of
yep.
such. I think that there might be a little bit of a hesitation to take a risk on a local
Yep.
startup, and that's something that we're just gonna have to get through.
Mm,
And I think that's something that everything from the capital to the startups themselves are gonna have to figure out. But I have a friend; he's doing a startup. It's creating a mobile app that helps
yep.
out with mental kind of health.
Yep.
And I think if there's anywhere, Australia seems to be leading the way with a lot of the,
Mm,
especially male emotional and mental health.
yep.
I think there's a receptive market here for these types of startups.
Mm,
I think we might have to pick and choose which ones
yep.
before we go and start to do startups across every
Yep.
industry. But I love seeing all this. I love
Yep.
seeing all that stuff starting to incubate and grow here.
Yeah, a few of my friends are investment bankers, and when we sit down and we talk, one of the things I always hear is that the amount of investors, whether that's private equity, whatever the type of structures that are willing to put money or incubators, whatever, is nothing compared to, well, nothing. I shouldn't say nothing. Very a lot less compared to other parts in the world,
Mm,
including America. So, if I'm a startup founder, and what tends to happen as well, you might agree with that, is a lot of Australian startup founders tend to, if they have a really good idea, they stand behind it and believe in it, they tend to fly out and
mm.
go to other parts. And I'm just wondering if that's a challenge you think the Australian government, as part of the initiative
Yeah.
to help, is that something they should be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, no doubt the brain drain is an issue. And even the Canadians complain about this, right? Like
Yeah.
the Canadians used to say, well, I'm growing all these great people. They're going to university, they're getting these PhDs. And instead of staying with, Jeffrey Hinton there in Canada working on AI, they're
Yeah.
flying down to work with Amazon or Google.
Mm,
That brain drain is starting to reverse up there because they've slowly over the years started building a critical mass of both people that you can
mm,
collaborate and work with, but also companies and infrastructure that can support them
mm,
and get to their dream. And then the right political means for them to sell their service to the US, to
yeah.
Europe, so that you can still be profitable and have that networking effect of your product rollout.
Yep.
The problem with Australia is obviously it's a smaller market at the moment.
Yep.
So we're gonna have to find ways of being able to consider it an Asia Pacific rollout,
Mm-hmm.
or somehow become, you know, break down some of those embargo and tariff and type things so that you can start to market your
Mm-hmm.
services over in the US. And marketplaces like, Google and Apple, where you can sell your apps, for example, if that's
Yep.
what your startup's all about, that does make it a lot easier. So
Yep.
you can put your app out there and start making money.
Right.
So seeing stuff like Canva and Atlassian making great headway,
Yep.
doing that, still maintaining a presence here, is what we should endeavor for. But we can't be mistaken. Like, it's not because you're going to become a quadrillionaire
Yep.
focusing only on the Australian market.
Yep.
The second part of that, though, is obviously making sure you bring the right talent here.
Yep.
And we were joking before this, or commenting earlier, that just today, Singapore announced that they're offering a visa. They're trying to attract more technology leaders to Singapore to make it out to be an innovation hub. And the timing is perfect with a lot of people trying to get out of China. It's also perfect because I used to see this in Silicon Valley, a lot of China nationals are trying to come back to Asia. I mean, there is a calling. It's your cultural roots. It's
Yep.
where your family is. They don't want to stay in Silicon Valley forever. So they actually do come back with Beidou and others, and they want to come back to this area. So you almost have to just be able to open the door. I mean, take away the friction. As somebody who came in recently with just a new visa for, skilled labor, it was really difficult until you got on the right program. And I'm glad that Australia has now offered this as of this time last year. But up until then, you had to go through that 100-point system.
Yep.
And that's great if you're in your 20s and it's all about age and it's about how long you're going to make revenue for the country. But if you're trying to come in your 30s, late 30s, 40s, 50s,
It's a lot more difficult.
it's difficult. But now there's these visas that are coming out, which are great around, innovation. It's kind of funny because it's kind of innovation / quantum computing. And I'm like, well, I can't help out with quantum computing, but I can help out with analytics and innovation.
Yep.
And they're evolving that, and it's just awesome to see that. But we have to get more of those people here so that they can. I mean, why wouldn't you want to be in Sydney? Beautiful weather, great cost of living, great quality of life. Why not come and build your machine learning models here? Help get the universities up and running, RMIT, UTS, and all that.
Very interesting. So do you think the immigration policy, at least up until as of recent, has been more centered around other things? Because I think the immigration policy was more focused on things that were not technology based, things that were, there are other industries in Australia, including, construction, tourism, a few main sectors that we really focus on when it comes to, our GDP and income. And I was talking about this in one of the other episodes. We're not diversified in terms of the ways that we earn income. If you look at any business, if you have one or two products, you're at risk because one competitor that comes and, they have a product that is similar to yours or even better, your income is slashed by 50%.
Yeah.
And I think what happened when COVID kicked in, we all felt it. Tourism was out of the window, and tourism was a huge part of our income, right? You got your real estate / construction, you got your mining, and a couple others, but education was a major one of them. Tourism was a major one of them, and then education as well, because education, I think just from China, you were looking at 20 to 30 billion a year.
I think I would agree with you if I thought that the focus has evolved. In the past, without being an immigration lawyer and being super trained on this, the observation is probably fair that GDP here, largely driven by tourism, probably a close second or third, but largely BHP built in Rio Tinto, like export of raw goods. So from a strategy perspective, totally makes sense. This is what the talent resources that you want to bring in to focus on. But when you start looking at technology or business functions, service industries, you start saying, I want to be a little bit more like Singapore. I want to be a little bit more like London or whatever. You start saying, well, what do I need to do differently? And, diversification is important. But the deliberate decision to focus on technology or to focus
Mm.
on finance or fintech or whatnot,
Yeah.
that's a very important step. And when
Yeah.
you look at like Innovation Dilemma and some of these other books,
Yeah.
it all starts with, yes, you have to have an R&D group. That's not
Mm.
because you're outsourcing R&D to some magical group that's going to solve all your problems.
Yeah.
It's because you're making a deliberate decision to say, I want to innovate and grow in this area. So let's pull together a team and start working on it.
Mm.
And that's there's issues there we can touch on later maybe, but what I think we need to do from an Australia perspective is have a deliberate decision to say we are going to grow into this area,
Yeah.
and then let's make investments. And I
Mm.
feel like Australia learned this about 2 years ago. They started saying, we're going to start growing into this technology area. I think
Yeah.
there's an opportunity for
Yeah.
us. We're neighbors of Asia.
Mm.
We're basically brothers and cousins of the UK. Like let's
Yeah.
have innovation here in Australia. And they
Yeah.
started giving breaks for the Facebooks and the Googles and everybody
Yeah.
else to come down. I think we just have to keep going with it,
Mm.
and start making decisions on visas for people who are not going to make a lot of money working at the mines or
Yeah.
not going to make a lot of money
Exactly.
working in the orchards,
Mm.
but are going to be able to come help drive. I hate using the word innovation because I'm using this a lot, but drive change, drive
Yeah.
ideation of sorts. Um, I think they're making that decision, but we have to support the government
Yeah.
to keep going
Mm.
because that can change very quickly with a change of prime minister or whatnot, and that's something that we all have to play a role in.
Yeah. One of the things I used to look at is the manufacturing industry in Australia. And obviously, I did my studies and my bachelor's back in the day in industrial engineering. And so obviously, I look at that. And obviously, it kind of died over time,
Mm.
with the automotive sector eventually moving out.
Yeah.
But then I see a great opportunity now to use AI and machine learning to bring it back, because the cost of production can be minimized to a great extent if you have good technology that can automate a huge part of your production. I'm
That's right.
wondering if that's something you see an opportunity in, or even had conversations with companies about. Um,
Yeah, I think it's a really good fair point, and you see this across a number of use cases. And there's a side angle of that as well. There's some unique pressures or pain points here in Australia, such as solar power, desalination of water, that might even allow us to kind of be a leader in certain areas. The trick is, I think, whether you're in manufacturing cars or you're supporting the reef growth here,
mm,
finding technology and
yeah,
applying it in the right spot. So if you want to be like the Tesla, motors of building out your gigafactories for battery production and, making sure that that's coordinated with your solar panel plans
yeah,
and doing some of the great work that we are doing in Australia around the
mm,
solar panels and bringing all that stuff
yeah,
in there. That's specific driven work, marrying technology to a problem here.
yeah,
And I think that's the best way for us to leapfrog the
mm,
global in some of these areas.
yeah,
Um, One of the things that I'm seeing with, to pick on the reef, so we're starting seeing a lot of great stuff, collaborations with, Amazon, AWS, Google Cloud, all the ML technologies that
mm,
are provided in there to be able to start monitoring the reefs as they grow, as the destruction of it starts to increase, or new areas start to pop up.
mm,
There's amazing stuff that we're already doing, both we collectively, but also
yeah,
just working with AWS, that is around just working with how these reefs are growing and changing.
yeah,
And that's applying ML technology, cloud technology
yeah,
to a very specific, use case here in Australia. But that could then be leverageable in other areas as well as you start
mm,
monitoring stuff through satellite, and
yeah.
everything else. Um,
So,
yeah.
excuse me. So if you look at companies like, Microsoft, Amazon, all these different companies that have made leaps and bounds in, ML and AI, as a small business who's looking to, leverage that technology, is it just the best way to leverage existing, technologies that these companies have brought to the surface, or do you think um, businesses should look into how they can come up with their own technologies?
I guess it comes back to again, it comes back to that use case.
Yep.
And if I'm talking to somebody in sales or, let's pick on legal, right? Like everyone talks about sales and marketing, and that's where there's a lot of money.
Yep.
But it doesn't matter which area you're talking to somebody in legal or HR, and you say, oh, I think there's an opportunity here to automate, or you're talking to manufacturing, we are helping out with a pharmaceutical, and it's around looking at the vats that make these drugs. And it's a lengthy process for some of these drugs or chemicals. So the sooner you can look at the sensors that are coming out of that and say, this vat has gone bad, or, hey, even I can correct it by adding in more salt or something like that. The sooner you can do that through machine learning and anomaly detection, the better. So let's say there's that use case. Now, at that point, you got somebody who's willing to try to change something. Do you want to spend the next 12 months coming up with a custom algorithm and custom GPU set and a custom on-prem server and go and find a data scientist? Or do you want to try it out and check the viability of your idea? And that's where I think there's so much power with using the kind of call it off-the-shelf ML that AWS, GCP, and Azure from Microsoft offers. So what I usually say is like, let's run that pilot. Let's go for cheap and cheerful. A lot of the data science leaders at in Silicon Valley, often they say, build a model, do it within the first week. Just let's see if this thing has any kind of legs to stand on. And then you'll spend months after that refining it, maybe even scrapping the model and trying a different model. But if it worked for let's just say a random forest model, it's probably going to maybe be better or worse. But either way, it's a viable option. So we might be able to automate the detection of corruption in the vat using machine learning. So the AWS and GCP and Azure, they offer a great opportunity. And there's on-prem versions like H2O and Data Robot, but use the prepackaged models where possible, prove the opportunity, prove the financial feasibility of it, because it might still be very expensive to get the data to be able to run it through the model, or it might be non-ethic.
True.
But I would say try that out. It used to be that people would say, what's the biggest thing holding back machine learning? And we would say, oh, access to talent. It's so hard to find data scientists. But now what I would say is it's now that you have AWS and all these guys, you don't need the data scientists anymore. You need ML engineers, people who can just try it out using these prepackaged models. Now, what's the hardest thing is getting the business to start asking those questions, finding the use cases, and then getting the adoption of it. So get rid of all the technology issues, keep it in the business.
The technology has made great progress over the last 5-6 years, so that now the question is, and it comes down to applying it more than trying to improve the technology itself. I'm sure there's a lot more that can be done in the technology, but now it's about, okay, like you said, we have all these, off-the-shelf technologies that you can just apply the next day, and you don't need to bring someone inside to, like in a company, like a scientist or someone, to reinvent the wheel. It's more about, okay, what are the things that we're trying to solve and trying to apply these technologies to solve them.
Yeah, there was a funny one that Google published maybe 2 years ago, but a farmer up in Japan, and he saw his mom and dad toiling every day, trying to harvest cucumbers, and he said, "Gosh, they spend all day long just filtering through the cucumbers, good ones, bad ones, all that stuff." So he built a very simple model using out of the box, ML models from Google that could simply take a picture of the cucumber, say, "Yep, looks good, looks bad," and start to triage the cucumbers on the assembly line. And it was super simple, but game changer for this family. And in theory, for agriculture, these things are starting to pop up, and you're seeing some really game changers come through, leveraging out of the box ML and technology and tools and stuff like that. You don't have to boil the ocean for all these use cases anymore.
Do you see more opportunity in leveraging data to come up with legitimate business insights, or using things like voice, image recognition, video, all the things that allow us to interface a lot more, or maybe both?
Yeah, I think what you're going to find depends on the use case. So I think there's plenty of value to be gained from just working with your data. We're still struggling to get it all in one spot. We're still struggling to make use of how to contextually understand all the different things that are going on.
Yep.
What you will, though, find is that there's a lot of opportunity for narrow ML use cases especially when you think about edge computing. So whether it's a mobile phone or a smart, alarm clock that sits next to your bed, those may not be the biggest thing from a revenue generating thing, but could seriously change the life cycle or the lifespan or whatever of certain individuals. So those are very narrow ML use cases where, okay, we need to have some sort of model trained, deployed to an IoT device, and let that do its magic. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. It's going to be a lot of effort because we're still working through the technology to deploy these models to smaller CPU-based edge devices. But I would still say that the low-hanging fruit is still work with your enterprise data. Don't muck around with IoT, temperature, touch, voice,
Don't try to get
image.
too fancy before you start.
Yeah. I was helping a supermarket and we were talking about fraud as well, and different than the hardware one. And they're like, we actually know that people are stealing stuff, and I can actually sort of track, what's being stolen because we're getting pretty good with the data. I sort of want to do the computer vision just to sort of get the image. But it's not so that I know what I already know. It's because I want to have a picture so I can take it to the police and say, this person stole this whole shopping cart of food. And it's like, well, I guess there's value in that. But the logistics of deploying these cameras to all of your retail stores, maintaining them and all that stuff, is it really worth it? Why don't you just try to find ways of, programmatically stopping people of walking out with the carts? Put the little brakes on the thing, have it turn off when you get close to the thing, if you the exit, if you think that they're stealing it. So there's easier ways to solve a lot of the problems before you go crazy with some of these fancier ML models.
So we've been talking about data and people and collecting data, and pretty sure everyone who's watching is wondering, where does privacy fits in? Even with that example where you have a camera watching people, closing up, to see who that person is. Where do you see privacy going in the next few years, and where is it today? And can it be a challenge to a lot of businesses trying to solve legitimate problems without obviously invading particular privacy for people?
Yeah, and actually, I think it's a really good topic. I mean, from a consulting perspective, I think the value that we can provide, yes, there's building the models, but equally as important are probably at least two other areas. One is around scaling it and getting that business buy-in, the stuff that we've been talking about. But the other area is around the ethics and privacy. And I think that's a huge area that while companies, let's pick on a retail bank or whatever, they might focus on building a great model. That's the right thing to do in the early stages. But a lot of them forget or don't move on to the next stages, which is those two other areas. The ethics area, so GDPR, General Data Privacy Regulations out of the UK, it pushed around and it made a big storm. And it's probably one of the better ones in the recent past that actually carries a bit of a stick if you break the rules. I did a number of projects in Silicon Valley with social media companies as well as hardware, software. One of the more interesting ones was with a personal genomics company where you spit in the vial. They look at your chromosomes. They tell you that you're, no surprise, I'm American, and so, but, it doesn't get much more private than that. And in fact, in GDPR, they call out some of the first industries we're going to look at is personal genomics and social media. So doing work with these companies, I started seeing that the data, the first step is data is very important. You do need to watch out privacy. The next layer on top of that, though, is around the inferences, the decisions, the automation that's being done on top of the data that also carries a certain amount of risk and security concerns. That's completely still Wild Wild West. And there's some interesting papers on this from Oxford and the Turing Institute around the right to a reliable decisioning. So if you're going to make a decision on my mortgage viability or my chances of getting a health insurance policy, you're actually fracturing your population in potentially unfair ways. So it's not just about managing the data privacy, but also looking at the ML models that are being used so that you're not unfairly kind of segregating your population and maybe limiting the opportunities that certain peoples have. So what that means is backing into that, first being aware of what biases might be coming into this, finding a way of systematically monitoring how decisions are made. So if you're separating out people into segments, can I just take a litmus test every once in a while to try to figure out, do I still have a fair balance across each of these different segments, whether it's from gender or sex or sexual orientation or whatnot? you have to find a way of systematically monitoring this, because there's no way to really tell what's happening in a lot of these models. So you have to take it like a Turing test and start saying, is this black box spitting out something that looks reasonable? If you're not monitoring it at all, you're going to be having some issues. If you're not thinking a little bit about what are some of the risks that are going into this and coming up with action plans if something does happen, you're also you're going to miss something. All this stuff is going to come to the head, and you're going to have a data breach, or you're going to have ML models that are spitting out something that's a huge PR nightmare. You need to be able to react to that and react really quickly. GDPR and some of these things like CCPA in California and the US, that's going to help by forcing you to start saying you have 72 hours to respond to this allegation. What do you want to do? So you need to have some sort of action plan around if these bad things happen.
I guess in Australia, we're not guided by them unless an Australian company is operating in Europe or in California.
Yep.
But nevertheless, you should still be aware of, privacy of, whoever you're collecting data of, because if it's not from an ethical standpoint, one day it might come and bite you. And so I think the education around data privacy in Australia can perhaps increase. A lot of business can definitely benefit from that.
Yeah, and it's the guardrails that come in place by a defined privacy and ethic policy. It's actually a good thing, because I can't tell you how many times I've had discussions with sales and marketing groups, and they say, I cannot use that customer information because it's creepy, or I can't use that because it's not ethical or it's illegal. But they've never actually checked to see what really is legal. And it's just this, I don't know what I can do, so I'm going to play it safe and not do anything. But the minute you start to separate and classify your data, and we'd come up with like 15 layers at one of these software companies, at 15 layers of personally identifiable information, ranging from not personally identifiable at all to, this is, known information about their gender, name, credit card, all this kind of fun stuff. But we actually had this scale. And then for each one of those scales, you can start saying, you can do this, you can do that, you can't do this. Yep. All of a sudden now, within these parameters, the engineers and the product owners and the business were able to start going crazy, and you start seeing the innovation come up. Yep. So these guardrails don't stifle innovation. They actually help guide it, and in some cases actually throw fuel on the fire. So you're right. While we don't have to comply with these regulations yet, and there's discussions of these coming through, it actually behooves everybody. And the world's moving this direction. You see this all the time with TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. The elections in the U.S. have flagged this as well. I think everyone wants to know that when they go onto their banking app, or they go on to Sydney Morning Herald to look at the news, are they doing anything creepy with my stuff? And people don't want to see that happen. So we need to be better at complying with some of these things. What are you using my data for? What decisions are you making with my data? Do I have the right to challenge that? Can I correct the data? Can I make an argument to correct the decision? So the right to a reasonable inference is about, I actually don't agree with what you said my credit rating is. I'd like to challenge you on that. Right now, you can't call up the bank and argue necessarily. You can't say, hey, you said my credit rating is a 5. I actually think it's a 6 because that one year I was actually traveling and I wasn't here, so I didn't pay my utility bill because I didn't know about it. There really isn't a lot of recourse to be able to do that. And I think that's going to be something that starts to come to light more and more as more things become automated with machine learning.
It's interesting you touched on credit, because I think credit is one area where data collection is probably not something that, like, there's a lot more that can be done when it comes to data with credit. Because one thing I noticed in Australia is that it's more about, and perhaps this is also the case in a lot of other countries, that it's more about the negative event that happened. So someone, for example, defaulted on paying the credit card. But is there enough emphasis on all the other factors that are positive, that should be counted to, lead to a better and more fair score?
In some cases, they don't have the data. Working with some retail banks here, and at this point, it was probably 5-6 years ago, but you could not connect individuals in a household together.
Right.
So, to your end, I think it'd be interesting to know if somebody just got married, because that means there's a little bit more of a, stability. Oh, they just had a kid. even more stability, but even more so an interest to maybe extend your line of credit so you can do something. What we used to do is target them based on events. Oh, hey, you just got your $2,000 or whatever from ATO for having a kid. Oh, that must mean you had a kid. Okay, let me go market, insurance or a home improvement loan. But what's more accurate to your point with COVID, and the job keeper and all this going on, the mortgage industry is scared, right? I mean, what's going to happen in March? The existing mortgage credit models and risk models are based on standard models or maybe proprietary ones that were built before COVID. And a lot of the banks are now scrambling to build patches that you can put on top of this and say, can I somehow guesstimate which of these people will default come March? I mean, effectively, some of them may already have defaulted, but because of this, we're not asking them for money, so that it's just
because of the cushion.
So they're starting to ask questions, and it's like, well, what can we know about this? And I think that's where hopefully people are getting creative and starting to say, what other insights can I use for this beyond just postcode and age and other stuff?
Could it be partnership with other platforms? And obviously, not trying to suggest Facebook because it has a lot of clouds around it when it comes to data privacy, but could it be partnership with other platforms that do have access to things like you said, certain events that happen in someone's life that can give additional insight? I wonder if perhaps maybe a platform like LinkedIn could be used to share some information anonymously or in some shape or form.
Yeah, I mean, there are arguments coming out that it should be illegal to sell data, and you could see arguments kind of for that coming out of Facebook and these guys, because like you said, even when you were saying it, you were sort of hesitant to say, well, can we use Facebook data? What I think would probably be one, all the data that you can capture could be potentially useful. So the broader of a picture you have of an individual and a family, their hobbies, their activities, in theory, you can do quite a bit with. And this is what Facebook has done. They've pulled all this behavioral and kind of psychological study information into this, and it's amazing what they can tell about you. Banks, I don't know if they should have all that information, but it could start as simply as the model wants to know how stable are you right now, how short are you every month on funds, what's the likelihood of your profession based on your job code being able to get a job in the next few months based on how the economy is going. Just being a little bit more deliberate with kind of what am I trying to check and what data might be available is a great start. Some of that might come from social media and publicly available data, like just knowing that, for example, you're publishing, these podcasts, webinars is a good sign that, you probably will continue to pay your mortgage. Hopefully, I'll pay you after this. No, it
should be paying you.
So, I think there is a lot of insights that come through with it, but I've done the rabbit hole chase of, hey, I want to go chase after social media. What can I do with, blogs, Twitter feeds, all this good stuff. And the reality is that if you're just shooting in the dark, you're not going to get a lot of value out of it. But if there's something very specific that you're trying to do, great. The reason Facebook makes so much money doing their stuff is because you're looking for digital twins. You're saying, Rob seems to be really good at responding to, I don't know, camera gear. He seems to buy a lot of cameras. I'd like to market to people like Rob. So doing the digital twin of Rob and then, proposing your ad to them, using their data to try to make a credit worthiness score, it may not be the right thing. So this is where we have to be realistic with the data and what it's going to be good at.
Yeah, and also how much of these models, because no model is going to be perfect, right? You might find a model that gives you 90% accuracy, 95, 99, whatever that percentage is. It's always going to be anything but 100%. So when it comes to critical areas such as credit, for example, there can be a lot of pushback because it impacts, although it's good for 99%, it still impacts the lives of 1 or 5%. And so I think my mind looking at this, I'm thinking, okay, this is where I can see another area that I think can potentially be used. I'm just thinking, off the top of my head, is spending behavior and the data that you can collect from bank accounts. But again, how hard is it to make the case? Or are they doing that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that something that they are already doing behind the scenes? I'm not sure, but if you're collecting data on how much, Rob has spent this month on specific items, right? Going out, eating, or traveling or whatever, versus the rest of the year, or versus the last quarter, in comparison to how much
Mm.
Rob has earned, that could be something you can look at.
Yeah. I bought a car here,
Mm,
as one does, and I was surprised that in the application it said how much money do you make and how much do you spend per month, and
mm,
I sort of said, oh, I don't know, I
mm,
just moved here, I have no
yeah.
idea, and you just put numbers in,
Mm,
and I granted they can't go check with CBA or NAB or
mm,
Westpac, so they have to just ask you, but I do think that there's a great opportunity, and there's there's regulations again coming through the
mm,
UK and stuff, but open banking is this concept that
mm,
is slowly picking up here, and
yeah.
it's riddled with a lot of concerns and risk, and the big four sort of being a little bit
Mm,
edgy about it because
yeah.
it's loss of control, and
Of
control is
course.
money. But I think what it does is it offers some opportunities to create a centralized bureau of sort that you can
Mm,
sort of say, I may not have permission to look at your transactions, but I'd love to know certain behavioral aspects of this. Can you give me permission so that I can validate that you're credit worthy because you want this car or whatever, or you want this telephone?
mm,
You give me access to go check your credit worthiness with this bureau or whatever,
yeah.
and I'll do that.
Mm,
Now, if it's done right, that's not something that's owned and monetized by the retail banks. It's
mm,
something that's owned and monetized, well, ideally by you as the
mm,
individual who owns your data, but it's probably facilitated through some sort of organization,
mm,
not necessarily government, but some sort of organization. I'd love to see if we start getting open banking going because your transactions across all your financial services are quite telling,
mm,
sadly.
yeah.
And
Sure.
if you could bring all that together and use it for good, like that's going to
Mm,
be a good thing. Um, there's organizations, not to make a plug, but there's a good friend of mine. He's over at Haven Tech, which is building this concept of this super encrypted private kind of vault.
mm,
And whether it's genomic information, and
mm,
there's companies out of the US that are doing this, Helix being one of them, but let's say it's financial information.
mm,
I don't want to trust it in one spot. Let me
mm,
put it in one area that's like super encrypted, quantum computers can't hack it,
mm,
that kind of thing, and then allow you to kind of dictate who it gets shared with
right.
in a way. And it's their plans aren't grandiose to go and make this world thing that solves all this stuff,
Mm,
but you can see how it could play a key role in
of
something
course.
like that central hub.
Mm,
So I do think, and in Canada they explore this,
mm,
where at least from a mortgage perspective, the banks share information so that you get the full picture of the credit worthiness, so that you're not just hopping around, and opening up mortgages elsewhere and stuff.
yeah. Well, the problem you're trying to solve is sharing information without exposing the information,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And I think that's what Tech Haven is the company.
Haven Tech, yeah.
Haven Tech. Shout out to Haven Tech.
Okay.
Is trying to solve, and I think that is probably the next big thing.
Yeah, and the and go back to ML a little bit. I mean, there's this whole kind of branch of research that's going into federated learning of sorts, right? So this
Mm,
idea that um, I can give you a model that does your credit worthiness.
yep.
It's pre-trained to some degree based on my sample of data, but
Mm,
we're going to train it on your data. I don't have to ask you for your data, but let's say you could plug it into your retail bank, give it a few permissions, it will train the model using your data, your
mm,
transactions, and then when you give it back to me, I have a model that will be very accurate for you,
mm.
but I've never seen your data, and your data stays with you.
Wow.
So if you can come up with this model where you're allowing people to plug in their models,
Mm,
almost be trained for you, give you this personalization, but never have your data, it's a
mm,
little harder, maybe not impossible, but it's a little
yep.
harder to exploit that and monetize it. So I think there's going to be a lot of these types of things that start coming up.
Mm,
Apple and a few other academics have been building out these things where there's a lot of relearning that happens on your phone, and
mm.
it actually looks like you're one of the Googlers. So I keep looking at your phone
Yeah.
like it's an iPhone, but
I have an iPhone as well,
so
but I prefer Android.
oh, there we are. Shout out. Yeah.
Apologies.
But they're constantly learning, and they have an opportunity to keep learning.
Yep.
But you might be hesitant to send your data back up there, right? So
Mm,
Google will take your data and do whatever they do with it.
mm,
But why not allow them to learn based on how you're using it, what time of the day you're doing it? So there is miniature learning that's going on,
mm,
and that's powerful. That's an area that's kind of evolving now as we go. But your data is never getting beamed back up, which is privacy, but also saves you money on Telstra.
Yeah, I think a lot of people kind of, I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone, but I think a lot of people have gave up on the idea of, being having the data being private. I think a lot of people just from what they've seen and heard over the last few years with all the scandals and things like that, they're like, oh, oh well, whatever, my data's out there.
Yeah,
What can you do? All right,
nonchalant.
and they
Yeah,
just turn a blind eye to it, or they just kind of let it and live and learn to live with it. And I don't think that's healthy. In the long term, it will definitely lead to a lot less confidence in a lot of enterprises, and maybe a new enterprise or technology comes around that really disrupts that,
Mm.
that will take over,
yeah.
so
I think the trick is, you're not going to, you can't be a Luddite, and shut down from technology and
yeah.
say, I'm not going to believe in, I mean, you can be, I suppose, but you're going to miss out on a lot of the
Mm.
benefits that the world has to offer. What I think what needs to be done is, at the very least, you need to be aware of what you're giving.
Mhm.
And there's this concept of kind of the value of your data.
Yeah.
And most people kind of think in a transaction form, I give you my data and you give me access to this
Mm.
app or something like that. But what you need to understand is that actually there's a lot of this, they're using your data to do X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
They're making money in this way or that way. They're making money because they're using your own data to upsell you to new apps or new services. So there's you got to look at what that ratio is and the
Mhm.
leverage that you have on your data, because it's your data, you're giving money. I think, to your point, a lot of people don't even think about it that way. They don't
Mm.
ask, like, what's the leverage I have right here?
Mm.
I'm giving Facebook, and they've done the math, and forgive me, I can't think of the numbers
Sure.
right now, but let's say it's $2 per customer,
Yeah.
and I think some of these services it's like $11 per customer.
Mm.
So your data doesn't sound like it's worth a lot, but in
Mm.
aggregate across the globe, they're making a lot of money
Of
per
course.
year off of us.
Yeah.
Now, do you feel like you're getting that much value from it? Probably,
Mm.
but did you know that that data is then being used for all the ads
Mm.
that you're getting positioned for,
Yeah.
clothing, watches,
Mm.
whatever? So all of a sudden, Facebook might be making, not to pick on Facebook, but these companies might be making $100
Sure.
a year off of
Yeah.
you. So now you're looking at this leverage that is not really in your favor.
Mm.
So what if you could somehow become back in power of that, and you
Mm.
could sort of opt out of certain things, give them potential to go do this because you're getting this much in return for what you're giving them? Then a sudden becomes a little bit more of a, this is a proper relationship we have.
It'd be nice if there's a technology or an app that can bolt onto everything that you do, right? Your
Mm,
Google, your Facebook account, your social media, even your emails, and just takes control,
yeah.
right? And then that could be the next startup, right?
Yeah.
And then manages data for you.
Yeah.
As a person, okay, this is the level of data that I want to give. How can I, not have to deal with this, but be rest assured that there's someone or something in the background kind of managing these things for me? Because I think the biggest issue with managing data is people can't be bothered. And
Mhm.
it's a lot more complex too. Like, I have to go to this setting and I have to click on this and go to that and I have to read and I have to, whereas if there's something out there that can manage that for you
Yeah.
via API, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. And Apple, a bit self-serving, but they've started popping up messages saying, hey, did you know this app has been using your location? And they don't just say that, they give you information. They say over the last, 3 days, it's accessed your
Mm.
location 5 times. Does that
Yeah.
seem normal?
Mm.
Yes or no? And
Yeah.
like, little things like that will make it a lot more trustworthy to work with certain providers to just
Mm.
kind of keep reminding you. The other thing is when you accept the terms and conditions, boiling it down to human nature, human language, and
Mm.
saying, for the access to your information that I'm going to gather, behavioral, demographic, all
Mm.
this great stuff, even financial, transactional, I'm going to do this for you.
Mm.
If you allow me that, I will provide you X, better
Mm.
recommendations, better whatever, or
Sure.
I'll get rid of ads.
Mm.
Like there's some sort of kind of
Mm.
payment. Some of the better things that I've seen out there, like when you go to, like, BBC, I think was one of the earlier adapters of this, instead of just saying I accept cookies, they sort of gave you a little bit of a very simple option, and sort of said, if you allow me to do this, I'll give you this. If you do this, I'll do that. If you only give me the bare bone minimum,
Right.
then this is all you're going to get, and
Right.
you'll see this website.
Interesting.
You know, and so I think boiling it down to something simple but manageable will help out quite a bit. But you can't stop there. Like it's that doesn't check the box. You have to keep reminding people of the value that's coming.
Right.
And that's where the regulations are trying to step in and say, you can't just stop because you force them to hit yes so that you can look at the website. You have to keep acknowledging that there's a relationship here and think about it in the benefit of them as well as yourself. That's hard.
It's very hard. Do you think from a Rob as a consumer or customer standpoint, do you think that privacy is going to reach a point where it's sorted out and there's a very, very high degree of transparency and control and regulation? Or do you think they will become a lot more challenging with all the technologies and, all the entrepreneurial aspirations that large companies have, that's going to be very hard to establish?
Yeah, I think it's more likely that more of your data is going to get spread out there. The reality is companies right now are still not super efficient. I know you watch these Netflix shows and it looks like companies are like, they can tell what color shoe you're wearing because
it's not as much as
in
that.
theory they could, but it's a bit like, I don't want to tell you that Santa doesn't exist, but the world isn't really that smart yet. But it's heading that way, and it's heading that way really quick. And I think more companies, like you said, are going to start popping up. I think what we're going to see is more people are going to have to be more intelligent. Like I feel like, I know some of the tricks of the trade, and I can see like, okay, well, I just, I guess tomorrow I'm going to see ads on my, Google or whatever for this, or I'm going to see this. Like, I would hope that most people are becoming more aware and intelligent about what their data is being used for and how it's going to start popping up. So there's this change management thing that needs to be going through, and governments should be probably spearheading this and saying, are you aware of what's happening with your data? Are you aware of the pluses and minuses of it? Because the companies are not going to hold back from it.
Of course.
There's a lot of benefits that we're getting out of this. I mean, especially in the world of COVID, what would the world do without Facebook or Instagram?
Yeah, I mean, even personalization of ads is a positive thing, in my opinion, because I don't want to see ads. I want to know what's around. And let's face it, you're always going to be, surrounded with ads, whether like remove all the digital world technology and everything, you're still going to be seeing ads. Like back in the day, just walking around the streets, you're just seeing ads, everywhere.
Yeah.
Granted, it's a lot more now, but personalization can make it, or does make it in such a way that you see the things that you're interested in for the most part.
Yeah.
Right. So,
but it's where they're making decisions on your behalf, and it might be subconscious decisions, but they're nudging you in a certain direction. So there's been these studies, and they look at like, social media, and you take somebody who's on kind of mid-grade, in the middle of the political spectrum, and they start seeing ads, and it starts popping up their friends, and it's leading more and more to the right. And over like a year or two, they become like full right wing, like, evangelists. And this was your grandma, or this is your aunt, right? And it's because it's small little nudges, and the recommendation, and it starts to push them back up more and more, and it starts to like the momentum builds up. So what they've done subconsciously is start feeding you more stuff that they think you want to look at, and you start actually changing your behavior, and you start becoming even more of an extremist, which is quite scary.
Right.
There was a lady yesterday I was just listening to, and she was a big proponent of, why don't we just go back to what we're trying to get? Like, if I was Netflix, why use all this advanced technology to try to lead me down a trail? Why not just ask me, like, what kind of genres do I want to watch? Yeah, I like romance. I like horror. I like TV shows that are this long.
Rather than try to guess.
Yeah.
Just ask me.
So then I have the power to sort of say, I want recommendations by all means, and I'd love recommendations in these areas based on other viewers, but please don't try to just cross over all these genres that I could classify as my preferences and lead me towards one area, because you could be almost as guilty as making me a right-wing extremist.
Sure.
You're driving me towards maybe Netflix created videos, whereas really I want to be sure that I'm agnostic of any production house. So you have to be aware that these things, whether it's conscious or not, the nature of this tends to reinforce slowly certain behaviors, and it's amazing. It goes very virally in one way or the other way.
Yeah.
But ultimately, all they were trying to do is, based on your preferences and your viewing habits, show you what you might want to see.
Of course, I think you're right. A lot of the documentaries try to portray the big companies as evil.
Yeah.
When, in my opinion, that's not the case. The case is just being super ambitious and competitive, looking for the extra edge that you can get from data. So it's not really, I don't think the intention has, perhaps in some occasions, maybe in politics, for example, but in a pure commercial sense, the data is just, companies look at data to be able to get an edge and excel. And it just comes down to how much we can regulate it and as well be aware of it, like you said.
Yeah.
Now, I think maybe we can wrap up with, I think we covered that quite a bit, but if there's anything that you want to, I guess, share around, obviously you work in Australia, you consult a lot of Australian companies, a few key things that you want to perhaps share that you think are important for anyone who wants to leverage more data to, take the business further.
Yeah. I think what I'd throw out there is, I've seen a lot of really smart people get frustrated, either in general or, everyone gets frustrated, but in general, but with their companies also, because the companies will hire these really smart data scientists or these really smart, like, I don't know, let's just call application developers or something.
Yeah.
If you don't give them the use cases, the challenges,
Yep.
they actually leave. And I've seen some really like top-notch people leave top-notch companies because the business wasn't ready for their craft. And everyone says, I want ML, I want big data, I want cloud or whatever. But I guess what I would leave it is like, figure out what those use cases are, bring these people in to help solve those problems, but figure out what those are. If you don't know what it is, talk to people. I think we were joking a little bit about this before, like I'm learning this concept of the tallest poppy or the tall poppy syndrome.
Tall poppy syndrome, yeah.
If you go and talk to somebody out there, like at one of your competitors or even colleagues out there, I think we need to have a lot more of that collaboration and ideation and workshops where we start saying, you know what, this is what we started to discover. I'd love to share some of these insights with you. A lot of this is free. A lot of this is just, let's go have a cup of coffee. But I feel like a lot of the industries here do not do that. They try to innovate internally. They try to just kind of close door it, hire, expensive consultants to come in and give them, spoon feed them these things. But I think what would probably be better is if people took a step back and just started having some good discussions about what's working, what's not working, bring in other people, bring in consultants, bring in industry leaders, and try to come up with those use cases that are there. Because I'll tell you, like, they are there. There's plenty of stuff there. But there's nothing more frustrating than saying, I want it, but actually, I don't know what you're going to do. Just go and innovate. Go get me money and build me ML.
Just figure it out.
Yeah.
Do you think that a lot of companies here can do with, like you said, rather than trying to figure out everything themselves, just ask help from the neighbors or someone?
At the very least, consultants.
Yeah.
I think, we're seeing in general the consulting industry is moving back towards consulting. I think for a while we were heavily skewed towards, offshoring and outsourcing and kind of all this stuff, which was great. But I think what we're finding now is smaller engagements, more personal kind of touch. A lot of this can be free, frankly. If they're worth their reputation, they're more than happy to have a good discussion. Have that discussion, figure out like what's happening elsewhere, but also join some of the forums. There are industry forums that don't, block competitive rules. Like you can go and join, the AFR has their various industry forums.
Sure.
Go meet some of your colleagues. Go join some of these, CFO webinars or whatever it is. Yes, you're gonna get a bunch of noise and you're gonna get a lot of marketing stuff, but if you can make a few connections, that's gonna be invaluable. And figure out what others are doing, because innovation often comes from unforeseen areas, right? You look at the Post-it note.
Sure.
You look at mouthwash. These were not created initially for those purposes. So you got to figure out what's working in other areas.
Absolutely. And finally, how can people reach you? LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn's great. I'm pretty active on that one. And certainly Rob Sibo at slalom.com. If you want to go old school and send me an email.
Sure.
But happy to chat with anybody and meet up for a coffee and just do it for fun.
Beautiful. Well, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for making the time. And man, what a great, what are we, 75 minutes?
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah,
There we are.
it's been great.
Keep jabbering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rob.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
Cheers.